Hello, guys, and welcome back to a brand new episode of the Futurism at J2 podcast. I'm here with my co-host Bryan for this week.
I see you guys.
And we have a very special topic today, pretty recent news as well, which is US versus Apple, which, might be surprising to some of you. And this basically is just a lawsuit that is happening with the Department of Justice against Apple for basically alleging that Apple has become a monopoly, basically, right? They've had so much power in the face of just regular tech that a lot of people use, especially with their smartphones. So the U.S. Department of Justice is trying to get a case going against Apple. Basically, is trying to make some changes so that there is a little bit more healthier competition because Apple has been so dominant in just like the tech space, especially with their iPhones as of like recent years.
Yeah,
And you're an Apple user, so tell me about your experience as an Apple user. What do you think of this?
I feel like Apple forces you to get all their devices because at least for me, like only now have they recently done this where like I could also like text people who have like Androids and stuff on my laptop, but normally it would just be just Apple users I could text on my laptop. So I could just be working and doing everything from my laptop. And there's also this cool feature where if you have an iPad, you can like move your mouse from your MacBook to your iPad.
Oh, okay.
And then I could like type into my laptop, my iPad, and then just do everything. It just like felt nice to have like everything just like so integrated, easy to like airdrop, easy to do all these different things with it. That's why like I know like growing up, we all like knew the meme of like, oh, you have an Android, time to do a separate group chat
Yeah.
where you're not included because
Yeah.
we don't want those green bubbles, which to me is kind of like this new social cultural thing where before like monopolies and oligopolies have always existed.
Yeah.
Where there've always been like companies, especially like in the 1920s, they're like companies that were like larger than life. They were like super huge. They were like companies that owned towns, that like owned the water and the food that their workers ate. So the workers were always like indebted to them, and like they were like really spread out. But it's only now I think with the emergence of like social media and globalization that like people will then be like, no, Apple is my identity, and I will stand for it.
I will defend it to the core.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of like I remember we were talking like outside the podcast where you were telling me that like 70 to 80% of people under 25 have Apple.
Yeah.
Where
It's basically the norm.
Yeah, where it's become basically this like the cultural norm. Where like people are just like, oh no, you don't understand. You have to get like new Apple every year. There's like hundreds of like tech videos that like I feel like people who aren't in that tech like will watch them and be like, oh, did you see the Apple Vision? This is the new future. I could be walking and watching Subway Surfers on the subway.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's like one of the things, right? I feel like especially with a lot of tech monopolies, right? Like Apple is just an example of this, but there are so many out there too that we can talk about, is the fact that they kind of have become sneaky in the way that a lot of the public perceives them.
Yeah.
Because, generally if you're in any type of business class or any type of like class that deals with this sort of thing, there is this idea that monopolies are really easy to tell when they kind of manifest themselves, right? Like they're the only company around. You can only get their specific product from them. And so they're kind of like the king and ruler. Whereas, at the very least nowadays, you can think of Apple as a monopoly, but you can potentially refute it with like, oh, but there's still like Androids and like third-party phones. Like you can go and buy other phones. Like Apple isn't a monopoly, right? So there is this argument that like in the face of regular consumers, Apple doesn't seem like a monopoly, but the practices that they uphold kind of do say a different story.
And I don't even think it's like to like the regular everyday like consumer. I think it's the American consumer. Because if you look at other countries, whether it's China, India, or even the European Union, you'll see that the phone market is a lot more competitive than it is in the US.
Yeah.
A lot of these other countries have more consumer protections, more antitrust laws, and as well, like for example, with the European Union, what they did with the USB-C cables, where they were just like, no, you have to standardize this. They said to both Tesla, said to both Apple, like, hey, you can't make your own special little charger and be like, ooh, I'm quirky. It's just like, hey, no, one thing across the board.
But then I think you do have a point, I will say. But I think especially when you're looking at other markets, I think another differentiating factor between a lot of these markets and why the iPhone hasn't become as popular is not because of a lack of interest, right? All these markets love iPhones, and that's like a fact. But the problem is that especially when you're talking about other countries comparative to the US, is that a lot of these countries don't necessarily have the means, or a lot of the people within these countries don't necessarily have the means to buy a lot of the Apple products. Apple products are still a luxury item in a lot of these different marketplaces, right? If you go to Mexico, if you go to like South America, right?
I get
In the Indian market, especially.
I get what you're saying, but the thing is, like, I don't know if that's fully true in the sense that, like, if you look at like which places are like the biggest like markets places for it, like in India, for example,
Yeah.
they're huge consumer of Apple products, whether it's phone to laptops to all of that stuff. And at the same time, the European Union also super big into Apple products. They buy the MacBook, they buy the phone, they're
Oh,
like
yeah, yeah,
completely
yeah.
like integrated and all that stuff. Yet there's more laws that will like stop Apple from doing like sneaky little things.
Yeah, or not. Yeah, for sure. I was just saying that like there is a bit of a difference, especially because like it's been in recent years, for example, that a lot of different um, device manufacturers, for example, have tried to enter these markets with like very accessible prices, just because in some of these parts, people can't necessarily access the same type of technologies at like the same prices that you would in like the US, for example. I know, for example, in Mexico, right, getting an iPhone is so much more expensive because you get like have to get it sort of like imported to the country,
Yeah.
right? So there's like added costs even that make it even more inaccessible.
Mhm.
But there's still like a want and a drive, and it still has become sort of the symbol of like luxury in a lot of these, and a cultural normative device. Which again, we going back to that same idea. And this is especially bad because again, Apple isn't super nice with anybody else, right? We've all seen this. Like you said, Apple devices working with other Apple devices are amazing, right? Like your laptop working with your iPad in unison, another use for the iPad, which I've kind of started to like realize it's kind of useless in
Dude,
the bigger
it
picture.
really is. The thing is, I still like it because I'm starting to learn more how to like write like math notes on my laptop and to do like different like symbols and stuff like that. But it's just so much easier to grab like my iPad and then just start like writing notes like that. But then it's really begun to like realize that like it doesn't have to be Apple. It could be any kind of tablet device that like can take note that I can like write handwritten notes with.
And even then, right? Like I've seen people go back to pen and paper or like pencil because I'm being completely honest. Sure, the organization may be a little bit worse and you can't necessarily erase things as easily, but like the feel of having like a notebook and writing with an actual pencil is better in my opinion.
That's
I like the
fair, but
textural feel of like the paper and actually being able to hold it.
well, I'll raise you one. They've started making screen protectors that feel like paper.
That's been out for a long time, and then those degrade.
Yeah.
I've tried to use them. They're kind of similar to like matte screen protectors.
For me, I love tablets just because I'm like I can like have more customization.
Yeah, it's convenient. Like the convenience
Exactly, it's super
aspect is so much
convenient.
better.
Yeah.
But you can't be pen and paper, in my opinion. Just for the feels. But yeah, so for example, like their apples work with each other amazingly, but Apple doesn't like to play fair and they don't like competition. So what do? They stifle innovation or they stifle integration with other devices, for example. You can potentially have a smartwatch, right? If you have the Apple Watch and then you pair it with an iPhone, works amazing. Like you get all the metrics that you need and they get sent right to the phone. But if you're using something like a Pebble or a Garmin, something that is other than Apple, then a lot of the times all that information isn't as nicely converted to the Apple device. And so that brings about a question of this iPhone, specifically the phone, right? This has been sort of like the anchor point for Apple because it's sort of like a gateway drug for a lot of people, right? Like you get the iPhone and then slowly but surely, like Apple's ecosystem starts encroaching on you. Maybe the next thing you want to buy is an Apple Watch, right? Like it's something that a lot of people would consider like a lower stakes value proposition from Apple, right? Like because if you buy a computer, it might be up to $1,000. An Apple Watch
Easily, dude. So it's like
SE, like
1,300.
$300, maybe $400 for like an Apple Watch. So comparatively to like a lot of their other products, it's not as bad. So then you get an Apple Watch. Oh, okay. Now I need I'm looking for a new computer. How about I get the MacBook? And then you start to get into this ecosystem where once you're kind of locked in, it's extremely hard to get out of, which is another thing that the Department of Justice has alleged against Apple, is the fact that things like super applications, right? I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of super apps.
Yeah, and you told me about it before. It's like apps like WeChat that can then like have like multiple different features as part of it, where it's both like texting, it's also like social media posting. I think you're mentioning some other features about
You can
it
do
too.
payments as well.
Oh wow, I didn't know. That's kind of cool.
WeChat is basically like if you live in China, it's the one and only like true application because you can do everything in it, right? So you can do payments. Literally, you can access your bank account through WeChat. You can schedule like rides through WeChat, appointments. Like it's almost like Google in a way, where like you can kind of do everything if Google had the power to do everything, and it wasn't just
Well,
like
Google owns everything.
no, but like
They
the
don't let
web
you.
browser,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like people have individual websites where you kind of access information, but like WeChat itself is the process of everything.
Yeah.
Um, and the reason why they don't want these types of applications is because instead of, fragmenting your life into a lot of different applications that work really well on the iPhone, now you have one. And if you have that one that also works really well on another phone, well, now you don't have to worry about moving all your different applications and accounts from like one device to another, which adds friction, right? Like people don't want to deal with having to set up a new phone. Um, well, if you only have like one app which requires one specific login and you have everything tied to it, you can just like very easily migrate from one device to another. Apple doesn't want that. So they're not gonna let you like have that type of functionality or like flexibility when choosing another device, right? Like I don't know if you've heard, but there's people that like don't necessarily like love their iPhone, but once it's time to switch to a newer phone, they say, I'm gonna go with Apple because it's easy to transfer. I'm sure you've heard of
Yeah.
this.
No, it's the same thing that I've done. Like I remember when I first got my first phone in like sixth grade, I had an Apple because my family had, so it was easy to like incorporate as part of our like our AT&T plan.
Yeah.
And then after that, we just kept renewing it because then like if we wanted to save our pictures, if you wanted to continue that same account, then you just got a new Apple, you'd upgrade.
Exactly.
And it's kind of like a really like cyclic process of like, okay, now you're stuck with Apple.
Exactly. And in a way, I mean I get it, right? Like it's a very easy process. And in that sense, it just makes the whole process better for the end user, right? They don't have to think about it anymore. But a big problem with that is that now you're sort of in a way taking away their choice because you've created so much friction between the two options that now people don't want to switch away from an iPhone, not because they're really getting a true value proposition from the end product itself, but rather like one process of transferring devices that they're really like looking to.
Yeah, and something else I think is like pretty like vicious about like how Apple like conducts itself and like in its market is it's not just how it like hooks people in, but also it's who do they allow to come to the table for apps? Like what apps do they allow on the App Store? How much money do they take out of them? I know like Fortnite and Apple had this big like lawsuit that I'm pretty sure like Fortnite won, where then like Fortnite was like, I'm gonna circumvent the 30% tax that they have on us by like sending them directly to our site, or like I forgot exactly how they circumvented it.
Yeah.
But then Apple's like, okay, you're breaking policy, like you're out of the App Store.
Yeah. Basically, like the initial one of the guidelines for Apple and for you to have like an, I think it's a little different now because again of the ruling. But before it used to be that every payment that you did through an application had to go through like Apple's payment processing, which that's where you get like the 30% cut from, right? So if you were, I don't know, if a user buys something from your application or a subscription of something, and that was like $100, Apple takes $30 off of that. Now you're getting left with like 70. And especially for like, maybe you could make the argument that like for bigger players in the game, right, that are already making like pretty huge profits, okay, whatever, I'll like pity 30% of my earnings at least from that just to get like access to the entire like huge market that is iPhone users. But then when you're talking about really smaller companies that can't really afford that, now they're having to like either break even or just like lose money because of Apple's tax. And then you come up with this idea of you can only go through our payment system and you cannot redirect people to your own payment processing. What does this mean? If you include a link saying, hey, for like making an account with like a subscription, go to this website and sign up. You can't even do that, right? You can't redirect to anything that is like an outside payment system. So, and I think that's what Epic Games did with Fortnite, right? Like within their application, you were able to like click link. It would take you to like a completely different site. And through there, you were able to buy like V-Bucks or whatever, and then circumvent Apple's initial like tax.
I could say V-Bucks or whatever. Come on, man. It's important.
Exactly. 30% of your V-Bucks there, gone. And I think that's actually what they would do. I think they would charge you more if you did it through like Apple's payment processing than if you did it on the other one.
No, but it's also like a thing that's like not even just like Apple does. It's kind of like I think as like technology has grown like bigger, you see like social media apps, because then it's kind of like you'd understand what Apple is doing if it was like like a newspaper company. Like if a newspaper company was saying like, hey, you can like post articles on our newspaper, we're just gonna charge you 30%. People are like, oh, you know what? I understand that. But because Apple is so big, especially with like the advancement of like technology and like how big they've gotten, it's kind of like them shutting someone out of their market is them shutting them out of the entire market.
Yeah.
There's nowhere else to go. It's like what a lot of people like complain about like social media apps. They say like, okay, well, if you ban me from one of these social media apps, my reach is therefore like incredibly limited.
Yeah, exactly.
So then it kind of goes to the sense of like, should we define these technological companies different? Should there be like more government regulation? Because then even then, like, how do I say? I don't think the government hates it that it's like this. For example, you see like all the big controversy with like TikTok and stuff. Everyone's just like, TikTok's not safe because it's owned by a foreign company. I remember like reading that like a big reason the U.S. isn't like the U.S. government doesn't like TikTok is because the Facebook, X, formerly Twitter, will allow the U.S. government to like backdoors, so then they could like read your messages.
Yeah.
But then TikTok was like, no, we're owned by like a different government. Like, we're not going to do that.
Yeah.
And then US was like, this is messed up, man. Even though you have the same like rules and you do like the same thing as other like social media
country, so like
you're not letting us join, so we hate you. Get out of here.
Yeah, and that's the whole reason why like they were trying to make them sell their company to, which I
To
thought
a
was
US,
really weird. Like I didn't know the government had the power to tell a company to sell its company to like a US power.
It's the thing that I hate. It's more of just like people don't realize how powerful governments, especially the US, is.
Because it never happened, right?
Because it's kind of like people talk about like the debt ceiling and different things like that. Like, no, like money's made up, everything is made up. Like the US government, who's like the hegemonic ruler of like the world, can say whatever they want to do. If they want to say like, hey, TikTok, you like Jeff Bezos has to buy you if you want to exist. That's just what's gonna happen.
Yeah.
Maybe TikTok will be like, okay, fine, no, we just want to exist in the US, but
right, because like that's the thing is like initially you would think that like the US, due to like a lot of its rhetoric, right, we have the idea that there exists like a free market within the US enough to where like people will actively go against the government trying to encroach power on the ability to do free trade in the US. And like one of the fundamentals is like being able to own your company, right? Like having control of your company. But now like the US came in and was like, oh no, like actually your company, the one that like you have a hold of, you can't have it anymore.
you have to sell.
You have to sell it.
Yeah. And this thing like I think like we should stress is that thing like I don't think corporations are like inherently evil or companies are inherently evil. It's just like the whole point of a company or a corporation is just to make money.
Yeah.
So then they're gonna make money the only way they can.
Definition.
Exactly. If you have like 5 fish in a pond and the whole point of the fish that wants to do is like get bigger, the fish is gonna eat all the other fishes until they get big. If baby fishes are there, they're just gonna eat them. The only fish that they're allowed to be there is like livestock.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like what a lot of these like big companies do. Like Apple will only allow companies that exist that help Apple, that prop Apple up.
And even then, actually, which I think is what's really interesting is that a lot of the times what Apple will do as well is not even just like that's something that Google does. I will say, Google is the type of company that will absorb a lot of other companies. Which again, we can go back and talk about Google being like also kind of a monopoly, right?
Yeah, basically,
because they basically hold the key to like the internet with their browser. Sure, there's something like Chromium, right, which is technically like more open source, based off like regular Chrome. But everybody's like, if
it becomes default in a bunch of different computers.
If Google as a browser, right, like as a search engine, shut down, half the world will be in a panic. Like, it's that bad. But basically, like Google is the type of company that like will buy a lot of other smaller companies if they see potential in them, and it's kind of like a meta joke where like people will say, "Oh, that company that got bought by like Google, yeah, they're dead." Like, because Google is notorious for like buying companies, seeing if they can make anything with it, and if they're not like millions of dollars profitable by like the first year, they're done. They just cancel the entire project, and everybody just like gets laid off.
And there's different ways to do like Apple. Apple will. I remember like reading some of the reports saying like Apple will try to like control and influence a lot of companies that like that exist on their Apple market, like TikTok.
Yeah,
it'll try to exert control over like the information that's on it and like how people engage with it too.
Yeah,
which is like part of the reason for the lawsuit.
Yeah, and especially with Apple, like even though they do that, I feel like the Apple's entire like ideology behind like how they became a monopoly is really interesting, right? Compared to a lot of other people, Apple more so like tries to self-integrate and do sort of a more vertical ownership of their entire product line from like start to finish compared to a lot of other companies. Like Google, for example, they're not really worried about like making their own silicon. They're not really worried about like making their own cameras. They're not really worried about like all these things, right? They're more worried about like the breadth that they're able to take as a company, right? Buying up a Ring, buying up a lot of these other companies that do a lot of other different things, right? Like items for the home, telecommunications stuff. Like they buy a lot of things that encompass a lot of different areas. Whereas like Apple, what they do is they'll say, hey, like our chips are made by this company, which means that, we're kind of subject to them. Because if they don't let us buy their stuff, then we're kind of in trouble. We don't like that. Let's just like make our own so no one can compete with us. And so that's where you have the creation of like Apple's ARM chip architecture, where you have like the M1, M2, M3 chips.
Yeah, but even that thing is an example of not even just like vertical integration. I think it's an example of like vertical and horizontal integration, where not only are you right, like they're going into the chips, but also like spreading it to what products they're using into what products for. Before they started off with like the infamous iPod and stuff like that. And even then, Apple didn't invent the iPod. It was made by public funding in a public lab, which was then sold to the Apple company. And then Apple ran with it, sold it, made a bunch of profit, and then from there they began to build off of it and like invest and then come up with a whole different line of products. Like how many different versions of the Apple Pencil, of the iPad, of the iPod. I think they're even like bringing back some like older products too. I can't remember. Maybe like I'm like misremembering this, but I thought they were trying to like bring back like the wasn't they used to play music back in the day? The iTunes, not iTunes.
iPod? Or what?
Maybe I'm remembering wrong, but I thought there was like a specific Apple device that's like for music playing. I know my brother used to have one. Maybe it is an iPod. Maybe like I'm misremembering it, but I thought they were trying to bring back one of their older devices to like sell more.
Interesting.
I could be remembering wrong. So don't quote me on this. Maybe I'm remembering wrong, because if you don't know about this, then it makes me feel like I'm misremembering it. It could be something I'm thinking of something else.
From what I remember, and I could be wrong again, because Apple really only did they had various versions of like the iPod. They had like the regular iPod, iPod Nano, iPod Touch, iPod Shuffle, right? They had like different versions of the iPod, but these were all like devices where you could like put in music and then you'd be able to listen off of like earbuds or something.
Yeah, it's probably that. Then I'm probably just like confusing myself.
Okay, because you're not talking about like a speaker, right? Like
no.
Okay. It's probably an iPod.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking of.
Yeah. But yeah, so like these things, it's because I don't know. I feel like Apple as a company is really weird in the way that they do stuff. And they are, at least for me in my head, they're more like vertically integrated rather than like horizontal. Why? Apple is more of a company that is they're not scared to try things, but they're very scared of like actually publishing things onto market. So for example, the Apple Car discontinued.
What?
Apple Car.
What's that?
There was for the longest time rumors about Apple developing its own car.
Wow.
And it was true. That was true. It was in development. They had a whole bunch of technology, but then they scrapped the project very recently. They were just like, yeah, we're just not.
I feel like that would have been the worst car ever. that would have been terrible.
Know, right? But it's just like
I think it would been like a Tesla.
Apple is this company that like will try a lot of different things, but only the things that it perceives as like within its ecosystem and that work well enough will make it to market, right? And even then they have flops, like the Apple Vision flopped.
Yeah.
The Apple Power, I don't know if you've heard of that.
No,
it was supposed to be like this it's so funny. It was supposed to be this charger where, so you can have like your AirPods, you can have your Apple Watch, and then your iPhone, right? And all these things, if you wirelessly charge them, they all kind of need their specific like Qi charger, right? Like a wireless charger.
Oh yeah, the new one they have, yeah.
And then what they were trying to develop is like just this large pad where you can just like put everything on it and everything will be charged at once. Why? Because basically, like in order for something to really truly wirelessly charge, the coils have to be aligned with the coils on the back of the device. So they have to be aligned in like a certain way for the energy to actually transfer between them. So you can't really just put a big coil and then have all three devices charging at the same time. That's not necessarily how it works. So Apple was developing this specific way where they could like put the coils in a certain way where like anywhere you put them on the actual pad, all three devices would be able to charge. Amazing. Never came to market. and it was expected for like years. There were people waiting on this for like 2 years, and then they were like, "Oh yeah, it got canceled." After it got announced, which is even crazier. Like usually once an Apple product gets announced, it usually comes to market. So Apple is very like they really want things to work together. They really want things to work well, which is why in my head they're more of a vertically integrated company because like once they have a device that like is truly making the rounds, they want to own every piece of it. And why? Because they want to make sure that they're the only ones that are able to tamper with it.
Usability factor.
As a usability, right? If they are able to make the chips, now there's nobody else that is able to compete on chips because their chips are the only chips that work well enough for their company. If they're able to, for example, if they make their own camera modules, now they don't have to rely on any camera manufacturers. If they make their own screens, which they don't, they buy them from like other places. If they were able to make their own screens, well, now they're able to develop technologies that no other company can use. Which you might say, oh, well, you know, other companies can maybe make something that's similar, not if they patent it.
Yeah, and they also make their own like screws or tools to even fix their
like torque screws. I personally like have repaired iPhones before. As every low budget immigrant child does. Their iPhones are horrible. Like the screws are so small. Yeah. They use Penelope screws, which are like 5 stars, like a star screw, which is really weird that only Apple uses.
Yeah, so then they can also monopolize on like who can fix and control like Apple products.
They will, and this has been a documented case. They will also make things or make adjustments to the way that things are laid out on the phone, not because it provides any extra protection or because it makes anything ever more secure, but rather it's just like an extra screw in somewhere that holds a specific bracket that's only really there so that people have a harder time repairing devices. Like this has been a documented case. If you go to like Louis Rossmann, which is like a person that like repairs iPhones basically for a living, he's documented this, and he's also like a huge right to repair activist. If you go online and look for like Huey Jeffries, right, on YouTube, he also repairs and like restores a lot of like iPhones and older like Apple tech. He himself has also have been given Apple like really low repairability scores and just like reviews because newer iterations of their phone have not made it any easier to repair. So specifically with like the Department of Justice, what I'm like kind of concerned about is, yes, let's say that the Department of Justice does find Apple to be a monopoly, right? Which I mean, at this point, just because of the hold that they have on the community and society as a whole, they pretty much are.
Yeah.
What does this mean for Apple? Like, Apple has not had a great track record of like being very compliant with the rulings, right? Apple doesn't like when a government is able to take action. So what this means is that Apple will comply. Yes, maybe, you know, if the Department of Justice says to Apple, hey, you have to allow super apps, they'll be like, okay, yeah. But then super apps will now have like this specific restriction that will make them basically useless in the Apple ecosystem. And it's like, okay, yes, technically like super apps are allowed in the App Store now, but like all their functionality or they're so hard to get with in the first place that like it's not worth it to get it. So like realistically, what changed?
Is this the illusion of choice where then they're actually saying like you actually don't have a choice.
Yeah, exactly.
You have to choose the apps that we say are worthy, and if you try to choose the ones that aren't, you're gonna have to work for it. Yeah. And most people are lazy. Most people are just like, if it takes more than like 5 minutes to do, most people won't do it.
Yeah, exactly.
They'll accept it. They'll say, okay, whatever.
Right. And this has been a thing. Like everything that you talk about in terms of like Apple is made so that it's easy for the consumer, for the initial consumer, to use and to like expand upon. Right. Like I'm pretty sure you'd be comfortable with giving your grandma an iPhone. Like she'll probably get the hang of it.
No, my grandpa struggles so much.
No.
My grandpa, like he has to like call us, and even that takes like 5 minutes to call us, and then like my sister and me will have to go over there and like help him. Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, my grandpa's born and raised in Cuba. He'd probably be more comfortable sleeping outside.
Okay. But like, you know, the layout is like easier for
you would imagine. You expect it to be. Yeah.
But and that's great. But then like Apple again makes it so hard that like it's sort of only Apple's way of doing things, right?
Yeah, I can't imagine giving him an Android. If we give him an Android, I'd cry. I'd be like, no, there's no way. I don't know how to use an Android, so how am I going to teach you?
He gets a seizures, like, oh my God, it's too much information. What do you do?
No, he'd probably just break it.
Yeah, exactly. So like what personally, like, what do you think is gonna come out of this? I feel like there's a good amount of like allegations that like Apple will get some sort of like court ruling where they have to change their stuff, but like I guess what would be the solution? Because like Apple, we know the problem with iPhones. Like they're really hard to deal with, especially like if you're not in the ecosystem already. Changing phones, and like to the point where like it almost seems like there is no other options other than Apple a lot of the times. Like, what do you
Yeah.
think? What do you think a solution can look like, especially like now that the government is trying to step in?
If I'm being honest, this sounds very radical of me, but we need younger lawmakers because like I don't know, like you see the memes of like of like them like interviewing TikTok or Facebook or Meta where they're just like, does TikTok connect to my home Wi-Fi? It does. Oh no, you've hacked into my systems. And I'm like, it's not how this works.
As a computer science major,
Yeah,
this hurts my soul.
exactly. No, it's kind of like I do think like this is like a real thing of like we need people who actually understand technology. Like how many like laws and bills have we passed that have actually changed the way that we engage with
And
technology?
even then, I feel like we
It's
need
very
knowledgeable
limited.
people. There could be people that are our age.
Yeah.
that don't know this.
But we at least people with like some kind of base knowledge and at least with the kind of like understand like the culture of it. Like I do think it's good that like now for whatever reasons people feel this way now. But I think both people on the left and the right are like kind of like anti big tech. They realize the danger they pose and the kind of control they have over both our culture and our economy. Do I think they have like the knowledge of how to like change that? I'm not the most confident, but the thing is, I do think going through the legal system of going through the courts will be definitely be a lot better because then you at least put like injunctions and like stop different companies from doing specific malpractices.
Yeah. I personally
So
think that like
I'm
it-
hopeful. I'm
yeah,
hopeful.
hopeful. I personally think that like if Apple does get some sort of like ruling against this, I think this will send at the very least like a very big shockwave across all the tech spectrum because it's sort of like,
Depends how strong the ruling is, but
exactly,
yeah.
it depends because like, this will send Apple has been one of like very friendly with the DOJ for the like past few years, right? Like you've never really heard of any court rulings against Apple for the longest time, right? And if there was a court ruling, it was usually like a user or a group of users trying to sue for something. So now that the DOJ is stepping in, this is basically sending like a call out to all other big tech companies, right? Like Google. Hey, you know, we are looking at what you're doing. So you have to be a little bit more careful about what you do. Otherwise, if Apple got hit,
Yeah, but I feel like this is also like just part of like this. I do agree. This Apple thing is kind of like this is different
because again,
because
because
they're
they're
really
trendsetters, right?
exactly
They've been the good boy
but
for
and
the
then like,
longest time.
and they're specifically targeting their like monopolistic. I don't know if I made up that word, but I'm making it up right now. Monopolistic probably isn't made a word. Control over the market. However, like a bunch of these big social media companies get sued all the time. How many times has Facebook been sued for like breach of privacy?
But I feel like there's a bit of a difference, right? Because like, oh,
I do agree. No, I do agree. This lawsuit is definitely different because it's specifically targeting the whole practice of Apple. It's not like one specific thing they're doing like with Facebook.
Yeah.
It's specifically targeting like their control over the market, which is definitely different and definitely like I think a positive change in the way that like we're engaging with it.
Mhm.
But I do feel like a lot of it's been like the price of doing business, and companies have been like willing to take the step. I definitely think like this new Apple thing is definitely like gonna be a big scare to a lot of like tech companies. But like I'm optimistic, but like I do know that change will be slow. Like I know like even then like the changes that this court filing does have like that it causes will be limited in scope with time until like legislation and like regulation is like done that like really like stops companies from like taking advantage of people.
And the unfortunate thing, I think a lot of the times, as much as like hope there can be, there's a track record of, you know, the court is slow and law is slow, and tech companies,
They have the money to
especially
wait it out.
not even that, tech companies are fast.
Yeah.
So sure, they may be able to wait it out. Let's say the court ruling happens. It's not like these tech companies aren't agile enough to where they can circumvent a lot of the rulings, right? And this has happened before, right? Like with Apple, again, going back to like the App Store and everything, right? Now, technically, you are allowed to have like other app stores and like have you other payment methods through Apple. But the problem is Apple has made so many like penalties where if you're a small enough developer, well, now it's going to be costing you a lot of money if you try and redirect users to like other methods of payment rather than using and getting the 30% Apple tax. So
Just about the spotlight, yeah.
So as much as I want to say, yeah, like the DOJ is gonna like make a good ruling and Apple is gonna be hit in some like significant way that will alter the market, um, Apple's probably gonna end up being like faster and smarter a lot of the times.
Yeah,
And then it's
companies,
gonna
yeah.
take some time for another lawsuit or some other big change to really take hold.
Technology advances faster than like we can make legislation. Like you see,
AI
AI
has
is
been-
posing so many difficult like legislative problems, and then like some of the senators are still like learning how to deal with iPhones. So it's kind of like I'm not confident.
This reminds me of
What?
like the scene in Fast and Furious Tokyo Drift, where like they're racing down like the highway, and then like the American guy was like, "Oh, are you? The cops are right there. Aren't you worried about them?" And they're like, "Nah, like their cars are like can only top speed at like such and such. Like they have a limiter on them. So if you go above that, they don't even bother."
Oh wow,
Yeah, that was in the movie.
that's
And I'm pretty sure, no, to a degree, that was true from what I know in Japan. Like the cop cars are limited in speed. So back in the day, like when people would modify cars, and there was, I mean, there's still a car culture, but like way more, like more of an underground car culture in Japan. If your car was able to go above that speed limit that the other cars could, well, what are they gonna do? They're not gonna catch up. They're done. Like, so I feel like in a way, it's gonna be that same sentiment with this, where like
a pretty good
they're gonna
analogy,
try to
yeah.
catch up, but like I don't think they'll be able to.
They don't have the means to,
unless there's like they really make a big change in at the way that like companies like inherently are handled within like the US economy.
that or the company crashes.
But that will be by its own merit.
Yeah. That exactly. That'd be like something like crazy and completely like radical happening. But yeah,
Right? Like I don't know. I honestly at this point I don't think, and this is me personally, but I think Apple is big enough where I don't think it can fail.
yeah.
Right?
Look at COVID.
Unless-
In COVID, stocks went up.
Right? Like immediately right now, like
Perfect.
if Apple crashes, everybody's done for. The only way that I can see Apple like potentially getting some trouble is like if another competitor becomes as big as Apple in the industries that Apple is really strong in. So the main thing that I think is going to happen is personally Apple's going to get like a slap in the wrist. I feel like that's what's going to happen because at this point Apple is so big and a lot of people are over reliant on Apple products.
Yeah, that's fair. I think it's fair. Like the thing is, I want to be more optimistic because then like this is like, I think definitely like a landmark case where then the DOJ is specifically like, targeting like their like market practice, which is kind of crazy. But like we'll see. We'll see what happens with technology companies, especially these companies like too big to fail.
Yeah, because then again, like the over reliance, right? Because like if Apple just like shuts down, what are people gonna do? Like, what would you do?
I think I would cry and then I'll just buy new stuff. The thing is, I think it'd be easier transition for me because I think it's also like Apple has a monopoly on like the cultural aspect of it and the technological aspect of it. Like definitely like if Apple shut down right now, that would definitely like the world would need a while to then recover from that. But then I feel like some people would be able to recover easier because then other people would be like, what? What am I going to do every year when I'm waiting for Apple to release new products or talk about new products that they're going to make? I want my Apple car.
Or even then, right? I think. Oh no, maybe you might have it harder than I do because, like, for example, I have a Windows laptop, and I've used Linux as well a little bit.
Yeah, I'm trying to integrate because then I have my own PC, so I'm trying to like learn. But I'll be honest, Apple is so much easier to use because the thing is like I want to code more.
Do Linux.
That's what I've been trying to do, but it's been difficult.
How?
I'll show you
your
later.
PC?
Yeah,
On your
on my PC, yeah.
You can do wait on your.
Because the thing is,
PC
on Mac, I can just open up a terminal and stuff.
Yeah, 'cause
but
it's
either
a
way,
Linux
I think we're getting away from the topic.
Windows, you can do a dual boot, which is what I did. Basically, you can install 2 operating systems, and then when your computer is booting up, you can choose which one to go into. And so I have like a separate like Linux only space that's for like development.
Then I'm asking for help with that. Okay.
It's super easy to set up. But yeah. So yeah, I don't know. This Apple case is definitely gonna be interesting. There's still a lot of like what ifs, right?
Yeah.
This has been like pretty recently. I'm just looking like an article from The Verge, and this was updated 2nd of April, and we're 5th of April, so it's like 3 days ago.
Yeah, I saw like another article published by, I think it was like Business Insider, or I can't remember the exact name, but they were there like 2 days ago, and it's not like saying like similar things to what like you were telling me.
Yeah, so there are still like a lot of unknowns, right? Apple can potentially have like a number of ways of talking, I guess, back to the DOJ and saying, "Hey, our practices, are good and they can be upheld by like this, and that." Because again, right, this case will potentially set precedent for like other major tech companies,
Yeah.
right? So
Because they'll say like, "Hey, I'm a publisher. Like, I should be able to determine like what I have on my site, and I should be able to charge people for like using my platform."
right, because
That's how things.
because it's the whole idea of like I created
Yeah, but then
I created the land,
the
so I should be
platform,
able to
yeah.
like say what grows on it.
Exactly. But it's kind of like Apple's too big to like, I think, use that argument. But at the end of the day, it's kind of a waiting game. The court case will probably take a couple years to finalize, but we'll see. Hopefully we'll hear some like better news. Hopefully there'll actually be more legislation that happens to like fight against these big tech monopolies.
Honestly, in
That'll
my
give us more
experience,
protection.
the only thing I want is literally just for Apple to be more open to like integration from third parties.
That would be nice.
As long as they're like, I think honestly, I think if Apple devices work better with like third party technologies like Windows laptops, and Android OS watches or whatever, I think this case would go a whole lot different.
Without kind of the profits. Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. That's basically what it looks like right now. Again, a lot of uncertainty with this specific case, but there's going to be a whole bunch of new information coming out, and hopefully this specific like court case finalizes, and the outcome does become better for the end consumer, because at the end of the day, like that's what it's about. As much as we love Apple as like a company and innovator, we still kind of hold the power over like what they do, and hopefully everything that they're doing should be for the better of the end consumer. In a way, sure, their profits, but like also the end consumer. So hopefully that happens and we have a better Apple experience at the end of the day, and they don't end up doing malicious compliance again.
Yeah.
Which, they have a bad track record of, but let's just fingers crossed and hope they don't do that this time. But yeah, that's been it. Definitely like go and look online at more updates about this, because it is pretty interesting, and especially if you're under the age of 25, there's a good chance you have an Apple product of some type. So this might end up affecting you some way, somehow, for the better, and hopefully not for the worse.
Yeah, we'll see.
But yeah, that's been it, guys. So
Thank you for tuning in.
and have a good day.